Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Herman, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at Tier Memorial Herman. Today we have a special show from you. We are filming at the Ed White Elementary School in HISD. It's in Houston. It's West Houston, near Gessner, and we have an amazing guest, somebody that I've known for a long time. We're going to talk about the ADA and some things that have transpired since 1990. Please stay tuned. This is Focus on Abilities. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. I'm Lex Frieden. Today we have a special guest, Kay York, and I'm going to introduce Kay, but before I do, I want to ask you a question. The Americans with Disabilities Act covers all types of people with disabilities. Does that include people with mental illness? We'll answer the question before the end of today's program, so please bear with us and pay attention. Our guest today is Kay York. Kay works for HISD at the Ed White Elementary School. And Kay, welcome to Focus on Abilities.
It's good to be back after 24 years.
Well, Kay, the first time we met was about 24 years ago after the passage of the ADA. And I know at that time we in Houston were trying to change the environment, trying to make our community a participatory community, just like the vision of the ADA. I think you approached me and Daryl Simmons and suggested that we go and meet the mayor to talk about what could be done. Now, Mayor Lanier had been a great supporter of the ADA. In fact, he was one of the leading proponents among community leaders before the passage of the ADA, so we had a supporter. But your idea, I think, was to go and meet the mayor and say, what more can we do?
Right, and as you know, most people at the beginning of the passage of the ADA really considered it physical disabilities as opposed to a comprehensive law. And so I, at that time, was working in the nonprofit business, so to speak, of mental health. I worked for an organization called the Depressive and Manic Depressive Association, and it went on to become known as DBSA, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, which is still in existence today. But I was very concerned that mental health issues were underrepresented. So in the past 2.5 decades, yes, we've come a long way both in physical and mental disabilities.
Well, from the standpoint of advocacy, when we worked on the ADA prior to its passage, I was in Washington much of the time and here in Houston right before the passage. The vision of the ADA was to include all people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. But in reality, people with mental illness, people with depression, manic depressive issues, were not really active in the community of people who were advocating for the bill. They didn't object to it, they supported it, but they did so quietly.
Right.
They weren't volunteering their own personal experience to be part of that advocacy. There were some exceptions, but by and large, as you point out, that community was not well represented. I think it was exceptional, the fact that you took the initiative in Houston to say, let's demonstrate the power of the breadth of this particular piece of legislation when we went to the mayor.
I think one of the reasons to address what you said about people in the mental health advocacy community is correct, that we weren't as organized at that point in history as people with physical disabilities had been. I mean, obviously parking slots were available, handicap parking as the old verbiage used to say, And so it wasn't until kind of the crisis of private psychiatric hospitals came about and people started, I'll tell you what the real movement was in the late 80s when people finally started recognizing that mental health issues were health issues, that the brain contributed to the person's problem, not because of poor parenting or they were just a bad kid. And so that whole community has evolved significantly since the very late 80s. I mean, when you think about it, Prozac wasn't even on the market until 1989.
That's a good point.
So
The initiative here in Houston was to ask the mayor to create a mayor's office on disability and a commission on disabilities to guide the city and the city council, the leadership and all the administration on matters that affected implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act at that time. The mayor responded very positively, and furthermore, I'd like to remind people that the leadership in Houston consistently has been what one might call pro-disability, or at least disability understanding. And when we talk about our mayors, and Mayor Lanier in particular, he understood that disability did not mean just people with wheelchairs or people with physical impairments. He understood, and I believe from some personal experience, perhaps within his family, that mental illness actually was part of the disability broad definition. And people with mental illness could be perfectly normal in the sense that they conduct a job, have a life, have a family, and so on and so forth, as long as they can manage the physical and psychological impact of the issues they're dealing with.
Well, you know, my dad was a diabetic from a very early age, and so I know what it's like to be around sugar-free sodas and sugar-free desserts. And, you know, the truth of the matter is there's really no difference between mental illness and diabetes. You know that you have to do certain things like take your medicine, because if you don't, then something extreme can happen. In the diabetic's case, go into a diabetic coma. And in the case of mental health issues, you might have an episode if you're bipolar, or you may have a major depression if you don't take your medication. So it's a manageable, treatable illness, just like any other medical illness. If you educate yourself, you take your meds, you follow your doctor's advice, and you surround yourself with a group of people who are willing to be your safety net.
Now, Kay, you speak from personal experience, and you have had a lot of experience in the last 24 years since we went to the mayor's office and secured an office on disability in our city. We're going to take a break now, but when we come back, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about some of your personal experience and how you've applied that to advocacy and how you might apply it to the work that you're doing now.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Good. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back with Kay York and more on Focus on Abilities. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. You're watching HTV. I'm Lex Frieden. Our guest today is Kay York. We're at the Ed White Elementary School. It's an HISD school off Gessner, and we're here in the great outdoors. We're talking with Kay York, who is a mental health advocate and also works here at the school. Kay, how long have you been at the elementary school?
At this particular elementary school, this is my 12th year, and I have to tell you, it's the longest place I've ever stayed because I really love the school.
Kay, do you work in special ed?
I do. I am the collaborative teacher with our special education department chair, and we serve kids that have learning disabilities, autism, Down syndrome, a variety of different disabilities.
Is that a typical program in HISD schools, or do you have some specialty here that brings kids from other parts of the district?
This campus does not. In fact, we have to send some of our students to some of those really particularly developed classes, especially for autism. So we're more generic than some of the other schools that, that's their specialty.
How many kids are in the school?
We We have over 800 children on our campus.
Wow.
It's a large campus.
I think I've been through about half of them. And how many kids are in the special ed programs that you're involved with?
Well, there's speech therapy students as well as special education students, and speech therapy is under the special ed umbrella. So we have about 35 to 40 usually in our classes here.
Do you ever think about the contradiction between the words special ed and or special and the word integrated education or integrated programming?
I think as we evolve in our nomenclature in the disability world, I think integrated probably sounds more collaborative with the general education, and that's the one thing I really get anxious about when people use the word regular education versus special education. That's a shift that's taking forever for people to get out of the habit of saying regular education. So in general education, I think the integrated care, just like in medicine, integrated medicine, you don't often go to just one doctor, especially if you need, a heart replacement and you have a GP. So I don't know what your experience has been. You're in the clinical model more than I am, but at least on the lay level, to me, integrated seems more collaborative.
So in this school, the kids who are in your particular classroom, and are they there all day, or part of the day they're integrated with other students?
Okay, that's a fabulous question, number one. It all boils down to what's called least restricted environment. And that comes in their individual education plan. All of our students that are identified for special education first have to go through something called a response to intervention process, RTI, and that's done by the intervention assistance team. And this has really been developing in the last 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
And particular care is being placed on not over-identifying kids for special education. But once we do have them identified, then the parents have what's called an initial ARD meeting, admission, review, and dismissal. And then every year they have to have an annual review, and then only when the ARD committee chooses to dismiss that child from special education are they usually dismissed. Again, a lot of things are happening in education in the last couple of years that this would be my 41st year of teaching had I stayed in teaching
Wow.
my entire career. A lot has happened in the last 2 or 3 years. There's a huge push on inclusion now into the general education classroom. And the reason I like it, although we still haven't worked out all the kinks on how you can achieve 100% effectiveness on doing that, because it's taking the general ed teachers a while to get used to that. It's developing a whole new system, delivery system of going into the classroom and working as a cooperative teacher instead of the general ed teacher teaching all the kids. But the bottom line is, my belief has been, I knew someone who had an adult child with autism, and she used to always say, what's good for general ed, or back in those days, regular ed, is good, what's good for special ed is good for general ed. And that's the truth. We all can learn from one another, and our identified special ed students learn so many of the social skills, nuances in the general ed classroom that they wouldn't ordinarily get in just a special education classroom.
Well, the other side of that is that the kids who are in the ordinary classrooms are also observing, working with, and understanding kids with disabilities better. I mean, years ago when kids would go to different schools.
Right.
I mean, there was no physical contact whatsoever. One would not be surprised if a kid could grow up and never have met a person with a disability, and that created a lot of problems after people became adults, because they didn't know how to behave in the community.
That's
but
correct.
now in the schools, and this is a good example, with these kids able to be part of the time in the special ed classroom, part of the time perhaps in the rest of the classrooms,
Right.
integrated with the kids at lunch and dinner
Exactly.
and during
That's
on
exactly
the
the way we do
playground
it.
and so on. That's a whole sea change, because the non-disabled kids get to know that the disabled kids like to have fun too. They
Yes.
have the same dreams and hopes. They can get dirty like everybody else. It's a good changing environment. What other kinds of things, from your perspective as a mental health advocate, have changed since the passage of the ADA?
Because a broken brain, which is the terminology used sometimes for people with mental health issues, has even more stigma, I think, sometimes associated with it than when someone sees someone in a wheelchair or has an arm or a leg amputated. I think the amount of stigma has improved, but I think with regard to mental ill health and mental illness, but we still have a long way to go. And the one statistic that I will tell you right now, last week was Children's Mental Health Awareness Week. The one statistic that's just so sad is that only 1/3 of the kids who have a mental illness have been diagnosed.
Wow.
So what happens then is those kids who might actually be observed by other teachers, administration, or behavior problems, they don't really understand that there might be an underlying mental illness.
They don't give them credit for having a disability and make accommodations as they're
Exactly.
required to do by law.
Exactly.
Let's talk more about that, but first I want to take a break here, Kate.
Okay.
Thanks for being our guest today, and thank you all for watching. We'll be right back with more Focus on Abilities. Thank you for watching us. We're Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and we're here with the HTV crew at Ed White Elementary School in West Houston, and our guest today is Kay York. Kay, we've been talking about mental health issues. We've been talking about special ed in the schools. We've talked about the ADA. Now, the ADA is 25 years old this year. It's a landmark piece of legislation. It guaranteed equal opportunity and civil rights for, at the time, 43 million people with disabilities, many, many more now. It covered every person with a disability, including people with physical impairments, communications disabilities, sensory impairments, and mental illness. Many people disregarded the latter and didn't understand the kind of accommodations that need or could be made for people with mental illness. What are some of those accommodations?
Well, let me back up for 1 second and say that I am pleased to report that the local Mental Health Association of Greater Houston took on a challenge 2 legislative sessions ago to introduce bills that the legislature did approve about educating teachers and doing a better, teaching teachers more about how to observe, identify, and how to refer kids with mental health.
So that helps resolve the problem that you raised about those kids that never get diagnosed.
Exactly,
Well,
exactly.
That's good.
And it's just like, I know probably most of your viewers have already heard that the incidence of autism seems to be greater right now. Well, is it really greater, or is it just because we're doing a better job of identifying those kids?
But once the kids get identified, what kind of accommodations can be made to ensure that they get a good education? Or in the the community, what kind of accommodations can employers make to ensure that people with mental impairments and mental illness have the opportunity to do work like everybody else?
Well, that's 2 shows. You want kids, or do you want employers?
I want both, and I want you to summarize both of them.
Okay. All right. Well, as far as kids are concerned, 0 to 3. If anybody has a child that they suspect has a disability, go to their local school district's Department of Special Education and ask for a referral, or you might have one from your pediatrician or doctor, and take it to the school district. They should be able to schedule testing. If your child is older than 3, then you go to the home school that you're zoned to and ask for a referral packet. If your child is not already in school, that'll be one set of papers, and then if your child is already enrolled in school, they will start going through this response to intervention. We want to make sure that we've provided some interventions before we actually start testing, because sometimes they'll respond to intervention.
And if you think you're not getting served appropriately, you can always go and get counseling from the Mental Health Association. They'll advocate for you, or Disability Rights Texas.
Yes, yes, and I've sent quite a few people to Disability Rights Texas.
Okay, so we're going to identify these kids, and then they get in the schools.
Yes.
What kind of accommodations do we make for them there? Do we give them more time to take tests? What are the issues?
Absolutely. Small group testing is almost a must for kids, especially with ADHD, autism, anything that they're highly distractible and don't do as well in a large group testing environment. In addition, in the general ed classrooms, we may present the curriculum that's the same as the fourth graders get, but we may present it in a slightly different way. In other words, there might be more, the fonts might be larger if it's someone with a visual impairment. Instead of 4 multiple choice answers, we might only give 3 because you know, the child is a little bit more easily confused, and we just want to know that they know the answer.
So the point is, the accommodations you make for those kids are individualized, and that's
Absolutely.
why you have this individualized plan. Now, when it goes to the employers, we have always said and advocated that the best person to advise on what accommodations need to be made is the person themselves.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So people who have mental health issues need to learn to be self-advocates.
I try to teach my students from the get-go. Number 1, what does the word advocacy mean? Number 2, by the time you get to middle school, if you can't advocate for yourself, nobody's going to read your mind.
What about your personal experience? Have you understood or really seen the power of that self-advocacy?
Oh, sure. Well, number 1, the person becomes a totally different person. When they feel like they are part of the process, when they feel like they're not the only one in the world, when they feel like especially for frequent breaks. Some of these medications, either A, you just get restless with it, or B, you get sleepy with it, C, you might have to go to the bathroom more often, D, people with severe ADHD just need to get up and move around. Well, if you have a desk job and you're leaving every 20 minutes, some employers might not take kindly to that. However, if that's what you need, then you deserve to have that accommodation. But having said that, the employer, and this is the other side of the coin, the employer also has to educate the rest of the employees about why that person, you know, it's not that you're giving them special privileges, it's just that they have a disability and we're accommodating for that.
Okay, another point that I want to make is that and I believe you share this view with me, is that the range of disabilities is so great that anything we say here in general has to be personalized according to the individual. So when we talk about mental health, the range extends from kids with learning disabilities, ADHD, and on the extreme of that spectrum, probably autism, all the way across to people with other kinds of mental illnesses, people who have manic depression, for example, people who have schizophrenia. It's all a part of the community of people with mental impairments, but also the community of people with disabilities.
Right. And the one math factor I would add to that, when I've given presentations in the past, it's not just the person with the disability. I say if you want to be conservative, use a multiplier of 3. If you don't want to be conservative, 5. Usually a person with a disability impacts not only him or herself, but at least 3 other people, whether it's family, friends, or employers. So we're not just talking about 43 million or whatever the current number is. We're really talking about a huge segment of society.
And people with mental illness are sometimes forgotten because they have hidden disabilities. And Kay, do you have any idea what proportion of the population of people who have mental illness or other mental health issues simply don't reveal that?
I don't know what the statistics are for that, but I can tell you that it's only been in probably the last 15 or 20 years that celebrities have been more forthcoming. As you may recall, I used to work with a professional golfer by the name of Bert Yancey, and he was one of the first people who revealed as a professional that he did have bipolar disorder. And people like Bert and other celebrities coming forward makes it easier for people with a mental illness to say, oh, well, I have an illness just like so-and-so. And and even like and I hate to bring this up because it's very sad for me, but like the death of Robin Williams, even though that's a very sad thing, that's one more way to educate people about major depression and what can happen.
So, Kay, if somebody's watching this program and needs help, wants some assistance, who would you recommend they call?
Well, if they're in crisis, they either need to call 911 or just go straight to the hospital if they're really in crisis, if it's life-threatening.
And if not?
If not, then they can call organizations like the Mental Health Association, 713-523-8963. There's many support groups. I don't have the phone numbers off the top of my head for NAMI, which is the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and that's primarily family members and also consumers. And we don't use the word patients anymore. They're consumers. And then also DBSA, and then there's other specialty groups like the Autism Society.
Okay. I really appreciate you being our guest today.
That's great.
It's wonderful to harken back on 24 years since we met, and 25 years since the ADA was passed. We've made a lot of progress, Kay. We have a long way to go.
Yes, got to stick around a little bit longer.
All right. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you all for watching. This has been Focus on Abilities. I want to thank HTV for dispatching the crew out here to Ed White Elementary today, being on location, and we hope that you've appreciated today's program. The question I asked at the beginning of the program was, are people with mental health issues included in the ADA? And darn right. Hope you've enjoyed the program. Please tune in next time for more Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Herman, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. And the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.